The impact sent my reading glasses flying across the polished marble floor of the Crystal Gardens ballroom. 140 guests gasped in unison as the sound of the slap echoed through the stunned silence. My left cheek burned with a searing heat, but the real agony was the knife twisting in my chest. Sloane, my daughter-in-law, had just struck me in front of everyone at her own wedding reception, all because I refused to surrender the keys to my downtown Chicago apartment. "That's what selfish old women get," she screamed, smoothing her pristine white gown. "Someone your age doesn't need all that space. Give us the keys now." The silence that followed was deafening. Not a single person moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, trying to gather the broken pieces of my glasses. Some guests looked away uncomfortably. Others whispered behind their hands, but no one, absolutely no one, came to defend the humiliated mother-in-law. My son Brennan stood frozen, staring at the floor as if I had become invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Sloane continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Brennan and I need our privacy. Your apartment would be perfect while we look for something better." For months I had endured her cutting remarks about my second-hand clothes, my aging sedan, my simple lifestyle, but this was the final straw. I rose slowly, feeling 140 pairs of eyes boring into me like burning coals. Tears streamed down my face, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted. That slap wasn't just physical violence. It was the moment I decided to stop being silent. My name is Evangeline Pierce, though everyone calls me Eva. I'm 70 years old, and all my life I've been a woman who prefers discretion over display. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 12-year-old Honda. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Sloane, I'm just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I've carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband Theodore passed away. Theo hadn't been the ordinary office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked toward the exit, the guests' conversations followed me like poison. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," someone whispered. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," another voice added. Each word was acid on open wounds. I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I'd used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I valued practicality over appearances. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year, hoping it would never be necessary. "Dashiell, it's Eva. I need you to come to the Crystal Gardens ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time they learned the truth." My voice trembled, but there was a firmness I hadn't felt in years. "Are you sure, Mrs. Pierce?" Dashiell asked, his professional voice laced with concern. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." I glanced back at the ballroom one last time. Sloane was laughing with her friends, probably telling them how she'd put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Brennan stood beside her, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse. "Completely sure," I replied. 30 minutes, Dashiell, no more." I hung up and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I'd worn to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Evangeline Pierce. And when that happened, when reality shattered their perfect fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of the word regret. The parking lot was quiet, illuminated by streetlights casting long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been supporting them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited, memories flooded my mind like an unstoppable wave. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago when Brennan came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from his childhood. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he told me. And there she was, Sloane, with her perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she surveyed my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know. "How cozy," she'd murmured, looking at my second-hand furniture. Her tone suggested the opposite. Over the following months, I began noticing patterns that put me on high alert. Every visit brought comments about how outdated everything was, suggestions that I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on what truly mattered: the prime location of my building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Brennan was in the bathroom, I overheard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom. His mother's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we get our own. She's so naive, she'll probably even thank us." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I maintained my composure. From that moment on, every interaction became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. What Sloane didn't know was that I had been doing my own research, and what I discovered would change everything. The psychological campaign intensified after Brennan and Sloane announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Sloane started bringing real estate, magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Ava," she'd say with fake sweetness. "I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible." But I had been conducting my own investigation. One afternoon, I called an old friend who worked in real estate. "Miranda, I need you to investigate something for me," I told her. "There's a couple very interested in my apartment. I want to know their real financial situation." What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Brennan and Sloane were drowning in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $55,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they rented was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their entire lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything suddenly made sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my supposed economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that united this couple, it was desperate need. My apartment, located in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My son, the boy I'd raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. In the weeks before the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Ava, "You can't keep being so selfish," Sloane had said just 3 days before the ceremony. "Brennan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Dashiell Monroe, my financial advisor, and the only man I'd completely trusted since Theo's death. "Dashiell, I need you to prepare some documents. I may soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." His voice became serious immediately. "Mrs. Pierce, are you sure this is the right time? Once this information is public, you can't take it back." But I had already made up my mind. The biggest humiliation happened just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Sloane called an important family meeting. She arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Brennan, but also by her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. "Eva, we want to talk about your future," Sloane's mother began, a haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary but dangerous," Sloane's father added, surveying my apartment with an appraiser's eyes. Brennan remained silent throughout, nodding occasionally, like a well-trained puppet. "Mom," he finally said, in a voice I no longer recognized. "They're right. Sloane and I think it would be better if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling anger begin to boil inside me. Sloane took control, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Ava, we've found a wonderful residence for people your age. 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to care for yourself," she replied with a fake smile that made me nauseous. "We've run the numbers," Sloane's father continued, pulling out a prepared folder. "The residence would cost about $2,800 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to help Brennan and Sloane with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked truth. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Eva," Brennan said, his voice rehearsed, "we hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to where you can't make rational decisions." The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I called Dashiell immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I told him through tears. "I want to know the exact financial situation of my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything." The results were devastating. Brennan earned $48,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts exceeding $85,000 on credit cards. Sloane worked part-time as an image consultant, earning maybe $15,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together they owed more than $130,000, not counting wedding loans. But there was something else in Dashiell's report that completely broke my heart. For the past 6 months, Brennan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He'd been inquiring about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information came at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Dashel hired, Sloane had been telling her friend she'd sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competing heirs. To her, marrying Brennan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation was the final straw. For weeks, I'd considered simply revealing my true financial situation, thinking maybe the shock would make them reconsider. But after reading that report, I understood it wasn't about desperation. It was about pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son beyond recognition. And now, sitting in my car waiting for Dashel, I realised the moment of truth had arrived. 25 more minutes, and Sloane, Brennan, and all those guests who'd looked at me with pity would discover who Evangeline Pierce really was. 25 minutes until their perfect worlds built on lies would crumble like sand castles. Headlights approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with brilliant white light. It was Dashel, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling each step take me further from the Eva I'd been and closer to the woman I needed to become. "Mrs. Pierce," Dashel said, getting out of his car with a legal briefcase under his arm, "are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there, there's no way to undo what's about to happen." I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they'd just humiliated. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Dashel. It's time they met, the real Evangeline Pierce." Dashel opened his briefcase under the parking lot light and began showing me the documents he'd prepared. "Mrs. Pierce, here's the order for immediate suspension of all bank transfers you've been making in Brennan's name," he said, pointing to the first paper. "Also, here's the notice of cancellation for the lease agreement you'd confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this tomorrow morning." I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread I'd carefully woven for years to protect my son. Now I was cutting those threads one by one. "And the payment for the ballroom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," Dashel confirmed. "The deposit you guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They'll have until tomorrow to find alternative payment." The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I'd been the invisible safety net, keeping Brennan and Sloane's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding happening at that very moment, all made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was withdrawing all that support definitively. "Dashel, I want you to understand something," I said as I signed each document with newfound determination. "This isn't cruelty or revenge. This is the only way they'll learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from consequences, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Pierce," Dashel replied with genuine respect. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I've seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you're doing requires more courage than most people possess." We walked together toward the ballroom entrance. With each step, my heart beat faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I'd lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered. 140 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Some guests recognised Dashel immediately. After all, he'd handled the financial affairs of several prominent Chicago families for decades. His presence at social events usually meant something important was about to happen. Sloane was first to react. "What are you doing here, Eva?" she shouted from the centre of the dance floor, where she'd been posing for photos with Brennan. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried that arrogance I'd come to know so well, but I detected a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dashel said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologise for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Brennan Pierce and Mrs. Sloane Hartley." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began pulling out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Brennan slowly approached, his face pale, eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked in a voice that no longer sounded confident. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Brennan," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in months, "this is Dashel Monroe, my financial and legal advisor. He's come to deliver some documents I think you'll find very enlightening." Dashel opened his briefcase and took out the first document. "Mr. Brennan Pierce, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother provided for your lease agreement has been immediately cancelled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning. You'll have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All colour drained from Brennan's face. "Financial guarantee?" he murmured, looking at me with eyes beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that part of him already knew. "Also," Dashel continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,800 your mother has been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses you believed were being covered by other sources." Sloane let out a gasp that echoed throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible!" she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Brennan doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began murmuring among themselves with increasing fascination. "Finally," Dashel said, taking the last document from his briefcase, "the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been cancelled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words fell like a bomb. I could see some guests nervously begin moving toward the exits. The realization hit Brennan like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. All this time, you've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word. "For 3 years, Brennan," I confirmed in a strangely calm voice. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you through a difficult time." Sloane began pacing in circles, clutching her head, but the truth was only beginning to unfold. "This can't be happening! This can't be real!" Sloane screamed as guests watched with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 12-year-old car. You can't have money." Appearances are deceiving, Sloane, I said, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband Theodore and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. The problems just came from where we least expected them. The music had stopped completely. The only sound in the ballroom was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and growing murmurs from guests who were beginning to understand they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones. "Mom," Brennan said, his voice broken, "please, there has to be some way to fix this." The wedding, the guests, everything, but I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd lost, not just money or financial support. He'd lost his mother. "The only way to fix this, Brennan," I replied, "was not to break it in the first place." Dashel cleared his throat loudly. "Mrs. Pierce, would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. Several guests moved closer, fascinated. "Please, Dashel," I replied with serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Sloane tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Dashel raised his hand and continued with surgical precision. "Over the last 36 months, Dashel began, consulting his documents, Mrs. Evangeline Pierce has transferred a total of $173,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Brennan Pierce, and his fiancée. This includes $51,000 for rent payments, $47,000 for credit card payments, $19,000 for vehicle insurance, and $23,000 for miscellaneous expenses. A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment. Others pulled out calculators on their phones. Sloane's mother, who'd remained seated at the head table, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. "Furthermore," Dashel continued, "Mrs. Pierce personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $57,000, money which, as I mentioned, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Sloane finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. "This is a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper." "My dear Sloane," I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her hysteria, "you've just learned a valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because Theodore and I valued privacy above ostentation." Brennan approached me with hesitant steps. "Mum, please, you can't destroy my life like this." "Destroy your life," I repeated, feeling anger boil inside me again. "Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 140 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words resonated like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that started this drama. Some had videos on their phones of the slap, digital evidence of the cruelty that triggered this revelation. "But that was different," Brennan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. We didn't understand." "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising. "You didn't know you'd planned a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home? You didn't know you'd brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge?" With each question, Brennan's posture shrank. Dashel took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his briefcase. Mr. Pierce, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact was like a silent explosion. Sloane staggered backward as if physically hit. "You can't do that!" she shrieked. "We're your family. Brennan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight." "A stupid fight," I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. "Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on your own wedding day?" Sloane's father, who'd remained silent, finally approached with poorly disguised panic. "Mrs. Pierce, I think we're all upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down." "There's nothing to discuss in private," I replied firmly. "Everything I had to say has been said here, in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public." Dashiell closed his briefcase with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. "Mrs. Pierce, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects begin immediately." He turned to Brennan and Sloane. "I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible." Sloane collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Everything is ruined," she murmured through tears. "Everything we planned, everything we worked for, it's all destroyed." "No," I said, approaching her. "What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect no consequences." I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. "This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Brennan went to his wife, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Sloane, we have to find a way to fix this." "There is a way to fix this, Brennan," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. "You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the person I hoped you'd be before greed corrupted you. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance." As Dashiell and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. 2 years have passed since that night that divided my life into before and after. As I sit on the same balcony where I once endured silent humiliations, I marvel at how different the world looks when you finally find the courage to value your dignity. The morning began like all mornings have for the last 18 months, with a call from Rosalind, the coordinator of the Evangeline Pierce Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I decided to use my name for the charitable organisation I founded with part of my redirected inheritance. "Ava, we have 26 new cases this week," Rosalind informed me with determination. "All similar patterns. Adult children pressuring older parents for property or money. Every case that crosses my desk is like looking into a mirror of the past." Yesterday, I reviewed the file of a 75-year-old woman whose son convinced her to sell her house for her own good, only to discover the money financed his failed business. The day before, it was a 71-year-old man whose daughter emotionally blackmailed him. "If you don't lend us $60,000, you'll never see your grandchildren again." The irony isn't lost on me. I've turned my worst personal experience into my most meaningful life purpose. The foundation has helped more than 450 seniors regain control over their finances, their properties, and most importantly, their self-esteem. Winston, my neighbour, is still my dearest friend, though he's now also the Foundation's vice president. His 74 years are filled with renewed energy since he started giving lectures on detecting family manipulation. Eva, he told me last week as we reviewed cases, I never thought my golden years would include becoming a detective for dysfunctional families, but it's the best adventure I've ever had. Margot, Brennan's younger cousin, moved into the apartment next door a year ago. After her divorce, she decided she needed to be close to the bravest person she knows. Working as the Foundation's educational director has given her purpose she never found in her previous career. Aunt Eva, she tells me frequently, you taught me that sometimes real family doesn't come from blood, but from those who choose to respect you unconditionally. The success of my public story brought unexpected consequences. The book I wrote with an investigative journalist became a national bestseller. When Love Betrays, An Elder's Fight Back has sold more than 220,000 copies, and all royalties go directly to the Foundation. Daschle remains my financial advisor and the Foundation's principal accountant. His experience handling the legal aspects of my confrontation with Brennan has become invaluable in helping others. The question everyone asks, the one that comes up in every interview, is whether I miss Brennan. The answer is complex and painful. I miss the child he was, the young man who showed flashes of kindness and honour. I miss the illusion of the family I thought we had, but I don't miss the last years of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and systematic disrespect. Brennan tried to contact me exactly 3 times during these 2 years. The first was 6 months after the television interview when co-workers had seen the show and started treating him differently. The second was when his son, my grandson Oliver, was born 14 months ago. The third was 3 months ago when Sloane left him, taking the baby and half their meagre possessions. Each time he called, it was to ask for financial help, never to offer a genuine apology or acknowledge the harm he'd caused. His pattern of thought remains identical. He sees his problems as external injustices, not as consequences of his decisions. The last conversation lasted less than 5 minutes and ended when he said, "Mum, your pride is more important than your grandson?" I replied with surprising clarity. "Brennan, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I'd ever hung up on my son, and it was strangely liberating. The topic of Oliver, my grandson, is the only one that can still make me cry. He's 14 months old and doesn't know me. I've created a trust fund for his college education, administered by Daschle, that will be available when he turns 18, regardless of our relationship by then. Maybe, Miranda tells me during our weekly dinners, when Oliver is older, he'll seek his own answers about what happened. Maybe he'll find the courage to know his grandmother for himself. What surprises me most about these 2 years is how much my physical and mental health have improved. During the last years with Brennan and Sloane, I'd developed chronic insomnia, constant headaches, and anxiety that kept me in permanent alert. My doctor says my current tests show stress levels of a woman 10 years younger. "Ava," Dr. Chen told me during my last checkup, "it's impressive how the body responds when we eliminate toxic stress. Your blood pressure is perfect. Your sleep is restorative. Even your posture has improved. She's right. I walk more upright. My voice sounds firmer. My hands no longer tremble when I make important decisions. One of the most rewarding experiences has been becoming a mentor to other older women facing similar situations. Patricia, 76 years old, came to the foundation 6 months ago after her daughter sold her car without permission to pay gambling debts. Last week, she sent me a photo smiling in her new car, bought with her own savings after legally recovering the money. Ava, Patricia wrote, you taught me that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. You taught me that self-love isn't selfishness, it's necessity. You taught me it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Her words reminded me why all this pain was worth it. Reflecting on these 2 years, I understand my story doesn't have the traditional happy ending where the family reconciles and lives happily ever after, but it has something better: authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and purpose that transcends personal pain. If I could send a message to the past, to the Eva who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would say, have courage. What's about to happen will be painful, but on the other side awaits a life more authentic than you ever imagined possible. My life at 72 is richer, more meaningful, and more authentic than it was at 70. I've learned that the end of a toxic relationship isn't a loss, it's a liberation. I've discovered that true family is chosen as much as inherited, and I've proven that it's never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. Did you like Ava's story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please support us so we can bring more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for your support. There are more powerful life stories on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story.